Welcome to the OxIgnite Podcast hosted by Yusuf, Raza, and Michael Hutson, two entrepreneurial MBA students at the University of Oxford. Together, we navigate the dynamic journeys of Oxford-linked founders, venture capitalists, and trailblazing innovators. Our mission, to fuel the fire in Oxford's next generation of boundary-pushing changemakers. Our fifth episode features Joshua Broggi, founder and CEO of Woolf, a startup that is facilitating increased access to world-class, globally recognized and transferable higher education, inspired by his tenure at Oxford. Joshua has fashioned a global network of colleges that uphold high teaching standards while retaining autonomy. Supported by several high-profile Silicon Valley investors, Woolf offers comprehensive software assisting colleges from course creation to degree issuance. Our insightful conversation covers the challenges confronting global students today, existing university structure shortfalls, and Woolf's solutions. By digitizing and streamlining the accreditation process, Woolf transforms educational institutions into recognized postgraduate degree providers. Joshua delves into Woolf's creation, motivated by the burdening financial realities in current higher education and the desire to disrupt it. We examine Woolf's innovative business model that focuses on accreditation, growth, and community building, aiming to guide colleges worldwide. Joshua also shares insights on Woolf's dual identity as a tech company and university, the evolving post-COVID fundraising landscape, and digital networking's importance for budding entrepreneurs. Tune in to learn more about Woolf's vision for universally accessible, globally recognized quality education. Get ready, get set, get OxIgnited.
Hello and welcome to OxIgnite. My guest today is Joshua Broggi, the founder and CEO at Woolf, which is making higher education more accessible by building a global collegiate university. Woolf's mission is to make higher education more accessible and ensure that it is globally transferable. They are building a network for a borderless future, helping a network of colleges around the world maintain excellence in their teaching and receive recognition for their programs. Woolf is the first global collegiate higher education institution that lets qualified organizations join as member colleges and offer accredited degrees. Their software helps colleges meet and maintain regulatory and quality standards, managing everything from course creation to degree issuance. Like the member colleges at the University of Oxford or the University of California, Woolf's colleges have the benefit of being a part of a major higher education institute while staying independent. And can't finish the introduction without mentioning some of the investors that you've raised from, Joshua. So Woolf has previously raised a $7.5 million seed round backed by world-class investors such as First Round Capital, Connect Ventures, Firebolt, Baleen Capital, On Deck, and angels including Peter Buckman, Tawa Henricus of Wise, Sten Tamkivi of Teleport, Tony James of Oyster HR, Matthew Clifford of Entrepreneur First, Tyler Cohen, and Charles Songhurst. So with that very impressive introduction done, welcome to OxIgnite, Joshua.
Many thanks for having me. Really a pleasure to be here.
To kick things off, could you give us a quick overview of your professional and personal growth journey leading up to founding Woolf?
It's a fair question. So I'm an American in background, spent much of the last decade in Europe. I was an academic professionally. So previously I was a philosopher and taught 19th century German idealism and did work on some of the Greeks as well. I, taught students at every level. And so I was on faculty at the University of Oxford. I was on the governing parliament there called the Congregation. Had some involvement in other kind of administrative things related to being a faculty member, but really I was just an academic until I started Woolf about 5 years ago. I'd always had an entrepreneurial interest. I had run companies on the side whilst I was an academic, but began Woolf with colleagues from Oxford 5 years ago. The mission is, as you said, to make world-class higher education more accessible and ensure it's globally transferable. The transferability bit is the hard piece, which involves getting governments aligned around what's happening and ensuring you have the correct licensing in place and aggregating all of that possibility into technology and making it available by an API or software.
So if we just delve a bit into that. Could you expand further on what exactly are the different components involved in Wolf?
So, one of the challenges is that we have a growing student population globally. It's not true in every country, but it's true in many countries. And so the overall global student population is maybe around 207 million students. It's growing to something between 350 and 385 million students enrolled in universities by 2030. So it's just like a marginal growth of 25,000 students a day almost. It's not linear, but it's the equivalent of about 3 new universities needing to be created every single day for just years and years and years. And so to achieve that capacity increase, we've got to be a lot smarter about how the institutions that we're building are run. And the current institutions are very inefficient. And so one of the kind of measures of inefficiency in the university, from my perspective, is what's the administrative headcount compared to, say, the teaching headcount? And in most universities, it's often above 50%. So that's true in the United States, the United Kingdom. Another kind of measure of university efficiency would be what percentage of student tuition goes into a teacher's pocket. And so if I'm lecturing to a classroom of 50 or 100 students, maybe 1 to 3 or 4% of that student tuition ends up actually getting paid to me as a teacher. And the real challenge in that circumstance is that in the United States and in the UK, many students go into debt while they're paying those fees. So that feels like a very kind of broken dynamic if universities are relating students to teachers and the students are going into debt at one side of the classroom and the teachers on the other end of the classroom are earning, only 1 or 2 cents on the pound or the dollar of that debt. So that strikes me as 2 kind of indicators of really high inefficiency within universities. And then, of course, anecdotally and intuitively, universities feel very bureaucratic and slow. They're not keeping up with the latest technologies. And so how do we make sure that these institutions that are so important for our civilization are able to operate at the scale and speed that we need in the future centuries, not just in the past centuries? And I think there's a lot that we can do there.
So how does Wolf come in and look at those different aspects?
So we are the first global collegiate university that does partner with other education organizations. We allow them to become member colleges through a process in which we assess quality across a huge number of benchmarks. And in that sense, we are like, say, Delhi University or University of London or University of Oxford. So we are composed of many colleges. One way to think of it is, as a university, we don't directly have any faculty, we don't directly have any students, we don't directly have any courses. All of those things are true in virtue of the colleges, which are constituent members of the university. They all adopt the exact same quality assurance system, and it's a piece of software which aggregates this huge set of regulatory requirements and makes it available by an API. And so we do 2 things. We ingest data from the college side and the teaching, and then we push out kind of reports, mostly for regulators, to demonstrate whether or not the college is in compliance. And our obligation as a university or a higher education institution is to make sure that all the colleges maintain their compliance. So here's a more kind of aggressive way to state it. We can push a button and make an accredited college, and it's going to be recognized in about 57 countries when we push that button. And so that's a kind of magical outcome of a huge amount of work that's been aggregated into the software.
So I come from the enterprise SaaS world, and just to draw a parallel over there, it's like SOC 2 or ISO 27001 getting.
Yeah.
It's 27,000 or I think it's so those certifications used to manually take a lot of time to get as a company, right? And normally if you're selling to enterprises, those are things that you need to have if you're looking at selling into larger companies. But you've seen quite a lot of tools come up that automate large parts of that compliance process.
Yep.
And you're doing the same thing for the college accreditation. process, which takes up a lot of time amongst the other things that you're also
Yeah.
doing, right?
Yeah, like in the United States, SOC 2 is maybe at one end of a spectrum. Maybe there's like an even more extreme version. This is not my area of expertise. It'd be FedRAMP, which demonstrates like a much stronger version of SOC 2 that makes you eligible to support the US federal government on like, secret data and things like that. Accreditation is at the bigger end of the spectrum. So it's a much more challenging bar to get over than SOC 2. And then the maintenance is much more challenging as well. So it's not just that most organizations don't have the native in-house competence to achieve accreditation. To maintain it on an ongoing basis is a huge and costly challenge, even if they did have it. And so we've ended up in this position, like let's take the United States, about 4,850 federally recognized accredited institutions. Every single one of them has their own accreditation license, which is like more comparable maybe to a bank license than SOC 2. There's no reason for them to uniquely have their own license and their own massive dedicated staff to maintaining that, in my view. And it's not just that, half the headcount is dedicated to that accreditation license, but accreditation touches every part of the institution. It defines what workflows are required in order for something to be approved and how a new course launches and all those things. And so those are mostly non-digitized processes, or where they are digitized, they're not integrated into any kind of total service. It's like an email and some digital spreadsheets and just tons of stuff floating around. It's the reason why you have this huge ballooning of administrative talent in universities. You need a very specialized group of very smart people to take care of these problems as the bureaucracy grows. What we've done at Woolf is mostly package all that up into software. So you can run an organization and maintain an even higher level of compliance and proof around those things while, not having the people involved to do it. And so it's not just like, it's one thing to focus on the like compliance and regulatory side, and that's an important part of what we're doing. The kind of more important part is the effect of that, which is, look, when we partner with an organization, many times they are not accredited prior to working with us. And so they go from being like a 2-year long intensive boot camp to being a serious postgraduate master's degree in data science or machine learning or something like that. And so it then unlocks for those students real recognition for the learning that they've done, points on their visa for, say, permanent residency in Canada or another country that they want to move to or get a job in. And so it's just a really transformative outcome. It would be naive to think that accreditation doesn't matter insofar as it's deeply embedded into the cross-border policies of nations, their ministries of education, tax, and mobility, and so on. But at the end of the day, it's really about, are we able to help these organizations grow and scale? Are we able to help them improve their underlying quality? And do we really transform those organizations to help them reach the next level of their businesses?
Got it. Now, if we rewind the clock back a bit to your years at Oxford, how do you think that has helped shape you as a founder and a leader?
Well, to go into the space that we're in, right? So this is a low NPS, paper-based industry in which 50% of the headcount of a $2 trillion a year student spend growing to $3 trillion is admin and compliance. And so it's just this huge space, and the number of people that have the empathy and the grit and the patience to engage in this is not very big, right? And so like, if you're at the University of Oxford, this is effectively a decentralized university where the vice chancellor can be overturned at almost any moment by a very small fraction of the 4,000 person parliament. And you have these 38 legally independent colleges. It's a little bit anarchic. It's deeply bureaucratic. Much of the bureaucracy is duplicated between all these colleges and the university level. And so to navigate that system effectively requires real clarity about what you want to achieve and the ability to push through a lot of barriers. And so we have to do that at Woolf. It's a complicated set of solutions that we have to develop on our side. And then we need to create very simple interfaces for our colleges so that they can get the benefits. So 5 years or 8 years or 10 years of university bureaucracy is a strong foundation for building a business like this one.
And if we kind of delve further into how you came up with the idea around Wolf, could you expand a bit further on that? And also, what were your own personal motivations for starting Wolf?
So, we're named after Virginia Woolf, who talked about a more perfect future university and also talked about what's required for a female intellectual, which is a room of one's own and 500 pounds a year. One of the motivations is looking at the current state of higher education in which, you not only have students going into debt as they pay for all of the quality assurance and bureaucracy that is meant to protect them, but ultimately it can be a kind of crippling cost for them. But on the other side of the spectrum, looking at all the professors as well, and most of them are in temporary jobs. So even at a university like Oxford or Cambridge, it's a huge percentage of the faculty that are actually on these very short-term contracts. So most people don't know that university faculty, the normal average university faculty member, does not have tenure or something like this. They have a PhD, they work at 2.5 universities, and they earn kind of minimum wage. And so that's a really adverse circumstance if on the one hand students are going into debt and on the other hand teachers are living under a great deal of distress. And I began diagnosing like, why is that the case? And my answer is something like this. Higher education is a double licensed system. It's a little bit like taxi driving in New York prior to the invention of Uber. You had to both have a driver's license to drive a taxi and you had to have a taxi medallion to drive the taxi. And so if you took a ride in a taxi, like you're paying for the ride and you're paying for the medallion. And the medallion is like $500,000 or $1 million US and on a mortgage. And so you're basically helping pay for the mortgage on that medallion. Going to university is comparable. Paying for a teacher is not that expensive. Like you're going to pay for the teacher, that's your ride in the taxi, but you're then also going to pay for the license of this university, which has to be added on top. And so it's not possible to practice your profession on the teaching side without that second license. Like you can't drive a taxi pre-Uber without that taxi medallion. So if you have a PhD and you teach at a university, you're competent to do the job. It's like you know how to drive a car. But if you just teach somebody off campus, they don't earn a degree. And for better or worse, degrees are really foundational to the way the international system works. And so that second license is costing something like 99% or 97% of your salary. It's a very steep cost where you have students at one end of a classroom paying $100,000 in debt to a teacher, and the teacher's earning maybe $3,000 for teaching that class. So hugely costly, and I think something that we can fix. And it's basically a low NPS paper-based business that can be digitized, and we've digitized it.
I find that very interesting. It's almost, there's always this case where you have someone from within a system with a lot of bureaucracy, which might feel a bit boring for people to solve, but that's often where you find, like startups that are mining gold in that area, or so on. So that was very nice to hear. Could you just shed more light on who the customers of Wolf would be? What kinds of institutions are these?
Yeah, it's one of the really exciting things about Wolf. We have the privilege to work with some of the fastest growing and most innovative education organizations in the world. And so, that includes organizations like Scalar.com, PhysicsWallah, UpGrad, Alma Better, GoIT. It's a really interesting range of organizations. Many of them have grown very rapidly in high growth jurisdictions like India or Eastern Europe or the Philippines. And they have built these very big programs which are supplementing for universities. Often they have been the unacknowledged course producers on behalf of universities, where they were actually teaching the programs at universities and building out the curriculum because the universities didn't have the in-house competence to do it. And so then they've spun out independently or grown. And so when we partner with them, they're often growing, 50% or 100% year over year they're building new innovative programs in data science or machine learning or artificial intelligence. And so we really go through a process of bringing them on board, helping align their curriculum with regulatory standards. We don't get to define those standards; they're defined by governments. But since we own the university licensing, as soon as they are aligned in our software with those standards, we can push a button, they're accredited, and then they are recognized globally.
I think the global aspect of it is pretty interesting over there. So basically someone goes through the compliance process once with you, but then you've got processes in place that automatically fills out all the forms and stuff required to get them accredited. And how many countries was it that you mentioned?
So there are 57 countries which are roughly that are signatories of something called the Lisbon Convention. And so if you operate a government licensed university as we do, within one of those countries, the other countries are under a treaty obligation to recognize the degree certificates from it. That's kind of like one form of recognition that's easy to point to. There are a lot of other kinds of recognition which involve anticipating what our colleges need and then going to the Ministry of Education in dozens of countries and registering those degrees within their databases, making sure that we're fully in there. So for example, we found out that about 80% of our students in India wanted the possibility or option to move to Canada, but we were not registered as a university in Canada. So we became a registered university in Canada and recognized as such. And that means that any degree that's earned from Woolf, when it's brought by a student to Canada because they received a job offer there or something like that, that degree will count as points on their visa, it will count towards permanent residency and immigration and so on. So being able to run that process, it's an aggregation effort where you do that many, many times in many countries across many degree programs. And then by making it available through an API, you can deliver a lot of value.
Understood. If we get to understand, say, the business model behind Wolf, I've read online that you have called this accreditation as a service, right? Could you expand a bit further on that?
Yeah, so I think about the way we're growing globally in three phases. So the first phase is very simple. It's a little bit boring, but it really taps into this very challenging, extremely specialized area of accreditation. So like phase one, people plug in, they get accredited. And so if you're a brick and mortar college that does not want to have 50% of your headcount dedicated to admin and compliance, like you could plug into our software and get accredited. Or if you're a boot camp that thinks you want to elevate to the next level and really begin offering serious degree programs, you can plug in and get accredited. And that's the kind of core focus of where we've been for the last 5 years. The next phase of what we're doing, which we're just starting to do now, is to help our colleges be more effective and to grow more rapidly. And so we've developed a number of proprietary technology tools that help them to recruit students and convert their learning activity into accredited records, help them with student financing, white label course content, job placement, those sorts of growth tools that a university can provide. We have the advantage of working across many large organizations. On the one hand, we often get very good pricing, let's say, from vendors. And so we can provide those benefits to all the colleges, as well as some really unique capabilities that we have that are patented on the software side, where we can do things to help our colleges grow a lot. So phase two is really about the growth services that we can provide to our colleges. We're just moving into that. There's a future phase, which is really oriented around the community. What are the kind of alumni benefits of being part of this global collegiate organization? Do we have an internal venture fund? We get to see many exciting companies coming out of the degree programs that are being run by our colleges. We'd love to be able to invest in some of those. What are the other advantages? Obviously, you get a student card if you're a student at Woolf, and it's recognized in many countries. You get a lot of discounts and you go to museums and things like that. But there's kind of a long tail of community benefits that we want to be true for anybody who's a member of Woolf. So 3 phases. Phase 1 is accreditation. Phase 2 is growth. And phase 3 is community. And we're just at the point where we're transitioning from accreditation to growth and beginning to deliver some of the value there.
And if I, just so that I can understand better here in this case, as you grow, are there any network effects that come into play with different universities where, apart from your services, they are being helped by each other as well?
Yep. Yeah, there are a number of network effects. With some smaller organizations, for example, they do not want to offer full degrees, and so they can offer even a very short course. Sometimes they don't even go so far as to become a Woolf college, but they offer a short course. We can cross-list that course into one of our degree programs, and then the student who's taken that course can decide to upgrade into the degree program. When they do that, they've already earned credits in their pathway. So, with one of our organizations, over 98% of the students actually begin in a shorter program and ultimately upgrade into the degree once they've already made progress. And typically it's several months of progress. So you can take a kind of short, lower cost course, determine whether or not the program is right for you, and upgrade. And so that kind of network effect is very powerful and has begun to pull in other organizations that want to be part of that ecosystem and provide, students in shorter programs with the opportunity to move into bigger programs at Woolf.
And have you started already seeing collaborations between different universities? For example, with certain master's programs, you might have two universities tie up with each other. Do you see that happening in Woolf as well?
So we've started, and I put some of those opportunities into what I call the community bucket, right? And so that's also a filtering mechanism as much as a roadmap where we see the opportunity, we know we could do it, but we decide to delay on it. We have seen some things. There are some things that we can't announce yet, but where we are in collaboration with other universities for things like start online with one of our colleges, finish on campus with a university partner, things like that. Which are really interesting tie-ups.
Understood. So when you have some really ambitious goals for Woolf, what do you think are the key hurdles that you need to overcome to achieve that growth?
So, it's a very technical piece of software, right? It's an API first piece of software. So we have a really deep bench of talent on the technical side. And then on the accreditation side, it's also very technical. And so it's a pretty recondite business on the one hand. On the other hand, like the impact on people is just extremely exciting, right? So we are enrolling thousands and thousands of students who are having their lives transformed by programs that are globally recognized. We are, expanding around the world. We're onboarding new colleges every month. And so we are on a pathway to becoming the largest global university in the world. And we want as an organization to steward that responsibility responsibly and to make it a great experience for students. So I'm really excited about where we're going in that sense. Legally, we own 5 universities today that are part of the back-end network that allows us to ensure we have global recognition for our credits. And so there are some CapEx issues associated with that, where there's some startup cost to each one of those institutions before they become kind of net beneficiaries. But beyond those sorts of challenges, we're on a real growth trajectory as an organization, and it's exciting to see.
And it's exciting to hear as well. It's a very, very it's a noble cause in some ways as well, right? Because maybe I'm lucky I'm going to Oxford, right? But then for a lot of people, if given how much our world revolves so much around a degree program, if they're able to get at least some approval or accreditation for the universities that they go to, that can potentially help change their lives in different ways, some of which you've mentioned on the call so far. So you've raised quite a lot of money from some very impressive names. What was your fundraising strategy? And do you have any tips for any aspiring entrepreneurs who might be listening to this podcast?
Yeah, so look, I mean, and I should say, Woolf University and Woolf the technology company are two different things, right? And I'm the CEO of the technology company. I'm also the head of institution on the university side. And so those are run with slightly different aims and missions. But Woolf, the technology company, is a venture-backed technology company building cutting-edge software that solves really hard problems and eliminates, hundreds of thousands of pages of paperwork for any institution a year. So in terms of that organization and raising money, we raised from some of the top seed investors, certainly the top seed investor in the United States. I made a decision to move to Silicon Valley, so I'm now based in California instead of based in Oxford. And I think the requirement to do that is a bit less now that COVID is over, but it still has some signaling value in terms of your commitment to the enterprise. I certainly don't think that you need to hire in Silicon Valley anymore in order to be serious. And obviously, some of the most exciting startup markets in the world are in places like Bangalore and New Delhi. Raising money is hard, and I don't think you ever want to be in a position where you're dependent on raising money in order to have real product market fit signals. Otherwise, you just need to know it's going to be a multi-year grind. It's a harder fundraising environment now than it was when I raised. And so we raised a very large seed round. Although, the truth is even that was very hard and very challenging. There are a lot of low-level tactics around how to do it. Many of them can be found in blogs. One of the interesting facts about the world is that today a lot of the information that is specific to a geography is online. And so if you are thinking, oh, maybe I need to move to Silicon Valley in order to raise successfully, just move there digitally. Like follow different people on Twitter, connect with different, social groups online and so on. And you can effectively move to any geography in the world digitally and suddenly be in a kind of ecosystem of information that makes you an insider to that environment and opens up pathways. I can tell you a whole series of our investors came from one person tweeting me, and another whole investment came from one person DMing me saying, hey, this looks interesting. And I followed up with them. So that's because I made a decision even prior to moving to the United States to move into the digital environment that was relevant to Silicon Valley.
And how did you go about engaging with that community online? Was it commenting on posts and sharing your thoughts within that community? So what was your approach?
Yeah. So you need to be present, right? And, Twitter is the new LinkedIn, you could say. LinkedIn is definitely not the right place to try and raise capital. And it's mostly the wrong people there. Look, like I said, there are a lot of tactics. I think you can read the blogs around those tactics, but you need to have some proof points early on. And so, raise at a lower price point and get one or two angels that are going to help you. Introductions are always superior to cold emails, but if it's a seed stage company, they probably know you don't have a network yet. And if it's a seed stage investor, they're going to be more willing to take a cold email. You can find, lists of people to connect with. I ended up with one very good investor who was generous enough to respond to a cold email and has been a really important voice in the company for a number of years. So I think it can happen by cold email, but overwhelmingly it's a recommendation game. And so talk to a startup that's in the portfolio of the investment company, get the founder or somebody there to introduce you to the investor.
Understood. And do you have any particular, could you name one or two blogs that you found particularly helpful?
I think both sides is good. I don't have any that are top of mind because it's been a few years since I needed them. But if you Google around, there are a lot of them. They probably moved to Substack, and there's quite a bit out there. Because investors are always operating like salespeople, they're investing other people's money typically. Sometimes they have some skin in the game, and they have a top of funnel and middle of funnel and closing part of the funnel. Right now, the funnel's pretty leaky. They're still doing their job, which is making themselves heard on the internet and taking meetings with founders and expressing interest. But the funnel is leaky insofar as they're not deploying as much capital. And so it would be easy for a founder who is just getting started to think that because they were getting meetings, things were kind of trending in the right direction. That is often not the case. So it is a more challenging environment to start up in. So like, don't start a company where you need $1 billion to get off the ground. Woolf is a hard company to start because in order to provide the core value proposition of accreditation, the threshold you have to get over is very high. So it's like if your business is sending rockets to the moon, you need to spend a lot of money before you're going to get your first rocket to the moon. And so one way to look at that is you need to be very aligned with your investors. Is this like a metrics driven investment, or is this a progress driven investment? So it might take you 5 years of failed rockets to make enough progress to get to the moon. If that counts as progress and people are willing to invest more money on it, you align that with your investors. But if it's metrics driven, like, you're not going to earn any money until you actually get to the moon. And so that might require just a huge upfront investment. That's a pretty hard one to start with.
Thank you. This was very helpful. I hope some of the aspiring entrepreneurs who might be listening to this in the future find that helpful. So I just wanted to get back to Woolf for a bit. So there's this big boom around edtech, but you're not really competing with any of the edtech players, are you? You're more of an accreditation umbrella organization that sits on top of them while providing different tech services or tech tools as well to these organizations, right?
That's right. When we partner with an edtech organization, if they have teachers and courses and students, and they partner with us, they become an accredited college, or they launch a college within our network. And then typically the value of those programs increases quite a lot. For the student, it means that employers take it a lot more seriously and they can move abroad and so on. For the edtech organization, typically means a price increase. And so the overall top line revenue without a lot of extra effort will increase, 30, 50, 100%.
That's great. Yeah, that's very nice. So this has been super insightful. Just to close things off, being a founder, especially at like a growing company, can be pretty tough on the mind and the body. What is what has been your approach towards managing stress and wellness? Have you found any particular activities that work well for you?
Look, I think it's an important topic. Most founders are under a huge amount of pressure, particularly the CEOs. Having co-founders is a really important step, and I named 2 very early engineers in the organization as co-founders, and that's just been hugely important. And they're so bought into the company as co-founders, and the 3 of us just work so hard on the project. It's enormously beneficial to have other people sharing in that. But building a company, it's a group effort. Like, the results are the results of everyone in the company. There are so many stakeholders, and it's really exciting to see these other people contributing. But it's true, founders are under unique pressure. And so, yeah, most of them, age pretty quickly once they get a company going. My own strategy, I run. So I did not like running. I was not a runner. This was not an enjoyable activity in the first few months. But since I found it to be really valuable and run almost every day.
That's great. Yeah, so I think thank you. It has been super insightful, and I've personally really enjoyed this conversation quite a lot. Before we wrap things up, would you please share where would be the best place for any listeners to reach out to you?
Sure. I'm pretty open about receiving contacts and especially helping founders if I can make an introduction for them or things like that. You can reach out to me on Twitter. It's at Joshua Broggi. It's very simple. It's my name. And then, at Woolf, it's Joshua at wolf.university, our website. Happy to receive approaches. I do get asked on, can you introduce me to various investors or things like that? Sometimes I can, sometimes I can't. I've got to have like a little bit of understanding of how the business is. And usually I'll talk to a person about it and look at a deck and so on. And then, the kind of standard, if you haven't seen it, is most people will put together a spreadsheet of all the different investors that they want to talk to. It might be 200 or 300 different investors, all the ones that they have reached out to in the kind of current state, and then all the ones where they're like waiting for an introduction. And if you just try and build a list like that and run through it cold, you're typically not going to be very successful. Whereas if you get an introduction to each of those people, you're going to be much more likely to have the conversation, have a real evaluation. And so that is a pretty common one with founders circulating lists like that, and always happy to help out if I can.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you, Joshua. It was a pleasure speaking with you.
Real pleasure. Thanks for taking the time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for tuning into OxIgnite. Please reach out to Yusuf, Raza, or Michael Hutson on LinkedIn if you are an entrepreneur with ties to Oxford and want to create more awareness about your venture, or if you are an investor interested in investing in Oxford-linked startups, or if you are a brand that wants to sponsor an episode of the OxIgnite podcast. If you like this podcast, please help us spread the word to your network. We would also welcome any donations to help us scale this podcast. You can donate at buymeacoffee.com/OxIgnite, OXIGNITE.